From the Detroit Free Press, I'm Nushrat Rahman with the Voice Briefing Special Report. Today, I'm joined by opioids reporter Georgea Kovanis.
I've been a reporter for the Free Press for 36 years.
And staff photographer Mandi Wright.
I've been a photographer at the Detroit Free Press for 24 years.
Georgea and Mandi join today to share insights into their year-long reporting into the drug overdose epidemic and harm reduction. We meet Amanda, who takes us into her life and world. We learn about the drugs that kill tens of thousands of people in the U.S. and also what's being done to save lives. This is just going to be a conversation between all of us because I want to pick both of your brains about how you did this story. What led you to this story? How did you come up with this idea to report out this story?
We had written about harm reduction before. Harm reduction is a strategy to minimize the harms associated with drug use. So with harm reduction, you get easy access to Narcan, which can reverse an opioid overdose. And by opioid, I would mean like heroin, fentanyl, painkillers. The idea is to keep people healthy in case they decide they want to go to rehab. It's not to force people into rehab because that doesn't work. It's to keep people healthy enough so that if they want to go, they can go. So that's basically what harm reduction is. But we hadn't really seen it firsthand. We hadn't seen people who are directly impacted by it. And that's who we were looking to find. During the course of our reporting, we met this guy named Andrew Coleman, who was in charge of the harm reduction programs at Access in Sterling Heights. We went out to see him one day and spent the afternoon with him. And at the end of the conversation, we said, do you think you'd have anybody who is involved in this, a drug user? He gave Amanda my phone number, and within a couple of weeks, Amanda called.
There's 1, 2, 3, 4 people here that use IV drugs. So I'm gonna give them probably like last time I seen them, I gave them like 8 boxes because there's 4 people, and that's almost enough for a week.
I think the best journalism is the type of journalism that shows you how complicated human beings are. And what you do in this story is we learn about Amanda as a person. We see the good. We see her relationships with her family. She is a complicated human being, and you've gotten to know Amanda over the course of a while. Who is Amanda?
Who is Amanda? Amanda is incredibly charismatic and incredibly smart. And she has a habit of sabotaging herself. This is one of my big peeves about storytelling in general. I think it's so tempting to cast somebody as like a hero or a villain. And there are very few true 100% heroes and very few true 100% villains. Most people are a combination of everything. And so you get Amanda, who's crack addict, heroin addict. A lot of the people she surrounds herself with are bad influences. She's a very complicated person. She's trying to do good while doing bad for herself, basically. And that's what she always says. She'll say, well, you know, there's a right way to do wrong.
I smoke probably every 15 minutes, you know, and I shoot probably 3 times a day, like every 8 hours, every 6 hours. It depends. If I'm going through something emotionally, I might shoot more often. If I'm busy on a task and not thinking about it, I might shoot less. Because heroin really owns you.
There's a 10-minute video that really gives you a sense of who she is. And in the video, she talks about her family saying, you help everybody else, when are you going to start to help yourself? Which I think is an underlying theme of this story.
Tell me about the first time you met with Amanda in person.
Mandy and I always went together. It was a pretty eventful day. We weren't really sure what we were going into, except that we knew we were going to the house where Amanda lived. Most people there were pretty welcoming to us. As it turned out, that was the day we saw Amanda Narcan, a woman. It's one thing to read about Narcan and about people overdosing, but it's another thing to see somebody starting to turn gray and to see them being revived. After we left there, Mandy and I just sat in silence in the car, and she drove around the block and parked, and we were both just like, oh my gosh, you know, that lady could have died. And that was our first day.
Hey, good looking. If you need Narcan or other harm reduction supplies, please shoot me a text with your name and need. And remember, safe and shoot clean.
And in terms of Narcan, can you briefly describe what Narcan is to readers who may not know what it is?
Narcan comes in a couple of different formats, and it can reverse an opioid overdose as long as it's given in time and correctly. Most of what Amanda hands out is nasal spray Narcan, like you would do with an allergy medicine. You stick it up the person's nose and push in the plunger, and that's how it works. There's also intramuscular Narcan, which Amanda and people who live in addiction actually prefer because it's easier to titrate that. One of the side effects in Narcan is that it can throw somebody into withdrawal and make them dope sick, and then that's a whole other problem. So one of the reasons Amanda likes the intramuscular Narcan is because it's easier for her to figure out just how much to give somebody so that they don't go into withdrawal.
I know both of you have paired together on stories like this or similar to this in the past. This obviously was a very intense reporting experience for both of you. Had you ever gone out to an assignment and reported on the ground like this before?
I've never been able to be so immersive in the life of an active drug user. Georgea and I worked together many years on stories of the opioid crisis. We decided that we wanted to localize a national crisis. We've been looking for somebody who'd be willing to be brave enough to tell their story and allow us in. There's so much stigma attached to drug use, and the fact that we were able to penetrate that stigma a little bit and that Amanda let us in, it's very unique.
I've been a reporter for a super long time, and I've written about a lot of people in crisis. I don't think that any other story has, and well, first of all, let me back up here. So just by nature, I worry. I'm like a big worrier. I'm always thinking about what's happening in the story and how's it going and everything. But this story took over my mind, not in a bad way necessarily. Amanda was one of the people, aside from my family, who was almost always at the forefront of my mind. How is she doing? Is she going to be around when we roll up today? Is she okay? All my stories take over my mind. But because this was so long in coming, she was top of mind for a very long time.
One of the things that occurs to me is just the unpredictable nature of reporting, especially on a topic like this. You really have to go with the flow in a way and be okay with not getting exactly what you need in that moment. From a reporter's perspective, like Georgea, and also from a photojournalism perspective, Mandi, why is immersive journalism so important, especially on a topic like this?
This addiction crisis and this overdose crisis is really abstract. I think it's very easy for people to say that's somebody else's problem. I think, though, that when you can tell a story with intimacy and you can bring a humanity to the people you're writing about, I think it opens eyes. And I think once eyes are opened, I think it opens minds. And I think once minds are open, change is possible. We work for a paper that values storytelling and values intimate storytelling, which not a lot of papers do that these days, especially with reduced staffs. I cannot underscore how incredibly supportive with time the Free Press was for this story. There were times when we would go to Amanda's house and we'd just sit in her bedroom and watch her nod out because that's what she was doing that day. In a lot of cases, you might be tempted to say, holy cow, we didn't get anything that day. But the more we immersed in her life, the more we saw patterns. So in the story, from one of those days when she was nodding out in her room, I think there's one sentence from that day. And so that was 3 or 4 hours to get a sentence. But in addition to the sentence, we also saw more of Amanda's life, and that enabled us to tell the story with an authority that we wouldn't have had we just parachuted in and out. It's easier for readers to understand when they feel they know the person involved. And that is one of the functions of intimate, immersive reporting. I think that it helps people see the subject as more than a drug addict.
And in photography, we sort of have this mindset that if we hear something and it sounds visually interesting, or that it's really an important part of her activity, we needed to see what Amanda was doing. And oftentimes that didn't roll out in a very convenient way. And it didn't just get handed to us in a package of like, I'll be doing this at 3 p.m. today. So it was one of these things that we really had to stay on top of in order to find it and see it. The thing about Amanda is she's a complicated and very interesting and charismatic person. She's got family that cares about her. She's got people that rely on her in the streets to get clean supplies. It takes time to show these things, but it's also great to show it in the context of her genuineness to tell that story. The story tries to touch on a lot of things that involve the national crisis with a human face, and Amanda allowed us to do that.
This is a massive amount of reporting, a lot of reporting in person. I'm imagining countless interviews with not only Amanda, but so many other people. How did you take that massive amount of reporting and turn it into that final piece that we see today? What was that like for you, and what was that process like?
It took a long time. I know Georgea wrote several times, redraft, photos were put in and taken out. I mean, the edit process was very intentional and very thoughtful. It's been so important to us to get this right.
Going through all my notes, I pulled out the highlights of each encounter, but translating that into the story took some work. We had all the information. Here's Amanda. Here's what she does. Here's how she does it. Here's who she does it with. Here's what her family thinks. Here's what her friends think. We had all that, but none of that would really provide readers with a full story unless we were able to weave the journey through it. I'm not going to lie. It was really hard. It was really, really hard. I'm pretty organized, but this taught me a whole new level of organization. Then the other thing, because we had spent so much time with her, there were all these moments where I just had to get rid of them. I had to delete them from the story because every single detail was meant to move the story forward. So at the beginning of the story, you find out that Amanda has 3 kids and they're living with her mom. That's sort of like one layer. Way in deep in the story, you find out more about her relationship with her kids. And you find out that, you know, she's got a needle in her hand when she's singing happy birthday to her youngest daughter.
Birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear. You look like a monkey and you smell like one too.
The other challenge was, how much do we want to give away at the beginning? What we try to do in the story is for every interaction the reader has with Amanda, they learn something new and they learn another aspect of her. And at the same time, we're trying to show this progression in her life. How does she get to this point where she's in this crazy, gross motel on the verge of going to rehab?
Yeah, you definitely see that as a reader where it just builds, right? There's so much momentum in the story. I was describing to our editor, Georgea, and I have the same editor. After I read the story, I'm like, my heart was in my throat the entire time, right? And you feel that visceral emotional reaction reading the story, but also the visuals, the video that Mandi, you created, all of it creates this really visceral experience as a reader. This is that rare look into something that we otherwise wouldn't have gotten a look into.
We can thank Amanda for that look. It's not because of Georgea and I, although we're the vehicle for her story.
The other thing about Amanda is she is really brave to let us in. I mean, we know, Mandi and I know that we're on the up and up. We know that we do good work. We know that we're thorough and everything. But Amanda let us into her life, but she also let us into her world. And by letting us into her world, she took us places where outsiders just don't go. And I've done a lot of stories, but this story especially opened my eyes in terms of the way people live and what challenges people have, but also what makes people feel proud. Amanda's proud of the work she does. Amanda's proud of her kids.
So this is a sensitive topic. And one thing that I was thinking about from the reporting perspective is portrayal. What was your thought process about portraying Amanda and writing about her and people who are going through this experience in a way that wasn't exploitative or that didn't take advantage? What was your thought process as journalists approaching this?
I think happens over a period of time that allows us to accurately portray her life. If our story had stopped on day one, after we saw her for the first time, that would be gratuitous, I think, to show an overdose situation, her saving somebody, and just building the story around that. We were able to build the story around that first day, but also her ability to hand out harm reduction materials to people in places that nobody really can go. One of my photos of Amanda, you see she's walking through a door in a drug house carrying 3 boxes, and her face is so intense. Like, she is determined to make sure that people get the materials she brought. We've seen her high. We've seen her super determined. We've seen her happy. We've seen her sad. You have to be there for moments, a variety of moments. It can't just be a one thing. I think that would have been exploitive to just show one thing or her just shooting up.
From the very beginning, we were pretty adamant about how this wasn't a story about somebody shooting up. That this was a story about a whole person. This was a story about a woman. Yeah, shoots up probably three times a day and smokes crack every 15 minutes or so. She's also a mom who's absent, but she loves her kids. We wanted to show a whole person because nobody is just one thing. And that was our goal. She's always been a helper her whole life, but now she's helping in terms of harm reduction, which is a huge, huge topic right now. The FDA approved Narcan for over-the-counter sales. And that's just an illustration about how seriously people are taking this idea of harm reduction. In the state of Michigan, more needles are being passed out than ever before. More Narcan is being passed out than ever before. Experts say that as a result, overdose deaths are still up and up and up, but they're not growing as quickly. In 2020, they went up 30% from the previous year. In 2021, they went up 15%.
And I always found the numbers to be staggering. I did the math because we write about it in 2 different places. And there's a statistic that somebody dies every 5 minutes from an overdose nationally. In Michigan, that equals 3,000 people a year. So I was like, is that true? Like, we say 100,000 people or more die a year in the United States from overdose. Is that really 5 people? And it is, the numbers flush out, unfortunately.
And the thing is, it's really easy for people to forget about that. It's really easy for people to say, oh, this is someone else's problems. But one person every 5 minutes, who's outraged about this?
And I was thinking in those terms, like, what is Comerica Park on a full day for a full baseball event? If the stadium is full for a concert, it's usually 48,000 people. Well, that's a lot of people. If you're walking to your car and walking to get concessions, you look around, take that times 2. Those are the people that are dying in the numbers. It's just staggering.
Mandi, were there people that didn't want their faces photographed, who didn't want to be photographed at all? How did you navigate that as a photographer, trying to capture this moment and that scene? What were some of the challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them in telling this story?
It was really important for Georgea and I to be very in the moment with people. There's legitimate reasons why people don't want to be identified. And we were very reassuring that that was not our goal, to expose people on that level. So it was very clear who we were and that Amanda was our main subject.
Mandi, can you walk us through the video you edited for the story? Can you describe some of the scenes you recorded and why you chose to include them?
You would think that a 10-minute video should be easy to edit. It has taken me months and perhaps a year to actually put this together in a thoughtful way that showed the spectrum of Amanda's life. We go back and forth at the Free Press about what we want to focus on, because you can't really do 2 things great at once. It's hard to do still photos and focus on video at the same time. But Amanda's story begged for both. And I just had to figure out when to divide my time between still photos and video. And those scenes sort of beckoned that skill set depending on what was happening. We did a hard A-roll interview with Amanda, and that runs pretty much through the entire video. The video starts out with Georgea asking Amanda what she wanted to be when she grows up. And it sort of sets the tone for the sense of innocence I think that we all share is that we all have aspirations in our life.
So when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a drug counselor. I wanted to be a photographer. I wanted to be a vendor at Eastern Market. I wanted to be a gardener. I wanted to be a mom. I wanted to be all these things.
It shows you the overdose scene that we encountered our first visit with Amanda, and it shows Amanda saving this woman's life basically.
You okay? Let's talk to you. Are you okay?
No.
You're not okay?
No.
Put the needle down. Is this mine? This is mine. Hey.
Sit over there.
Where's your pipe?
Sit over there.
She's in.
We also introduced you to Andrew Coleman, who is the site supervisor at Access in Sterling Heights, who really gives a definition of harm reduction and the importance of it.
Our main role is to make sure that people can stay alive in the process of their drug use so that if things change, that is there for them. They have that opportunity to seek.
Andrew talks about his meeting of Amanda and what she means to their work and operation as a secondary exchanger.
I will give Amanda, hundreds of kits of Narcan, thousands of needles, and Amanda has this unique and really beautiful ability to connect with the community that I'm not really allowed in. It's just, I'm not trusted, right? The number is really wild. I mean, we're talking about thousands of people who are alive because of her, right? They are healthier because of her, and she didn't have to do that.
We also introduce you to Amanda's thoughts of, she kind of tells you that she doesn't really steal from people, but the biggest crime she said she commits are against her family, not being there.
The crimes I majorly commit are to my children and myself, and those crimes are of morals, not being there.
She talks about how her family perceives her addiction and how she helps others but won't help herself.
I think he feels like I don't love him because sometimes I call him like, I love you. And he'll be like, no, you don't, because if you did, you wouldn't do the things you do. I love how you help everybody else, but you can't help yourself.
And then at the end, we sort of see it trail off with Amanda talking about how she loves the drugs she does. That is just her reality.
And I don't know if I really want to quit drugs. You know what? I want to know what I want? I want to quit any kind of negative consequence from drugs. That's really all I want. You know what I'm saying? I love drugs. I do. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, right?
We leave the video with her sort of in that push-pull of understanding the depths of her addiction versus where she might want to be.
I think it's powerful to hear her voice and to see her, because I think her charisma and her personality pop off the page. But as a reader, when you watch the video, you kind of see that too. You get that full experience of her as a person and her universe and what that represents and the problem it represents and the solution.
The solution being her keeping her community safer. You see her going into this home occupied by drug users, and she's trying to figure out what type of needles they need. You need short needles, long needles. Here's this. Here's how you use Narcan. She's very dedicated to her job. That is what drives her.
Can I just say one thing about the video? I read all sorts of stories about addiction, and I see videos. I have to say I've never seen anything as intimate as Mandi's video. I think the level of intimacy in that video is absolutely incredible.
I'm curious about any lingering questions that both of you have about any type of follow-up stories. What other aspects of this story still need to be told?
I don't know. I'm fascinated by Amanda. I intend to keep in touch with her. To be honest, I keep in touch with a lot of the people I write about because they're giving us their lives. They're allowing us sort of into their souls almost. And I take that very, very seriously because nobody has to do that. Nobody has to have a reporter and a photographer trail them from dope house to dope house. The people we write about, I take very seriously what they give us. And so I do intend to keep in touch with Amanda. I don't know what her future holds or what our future with her holds.
It's an ongoing crisis, unfortunately. There's a long way to go in solution. I think we need to keep examining the problems of it, and that could come in many forms. There's many undercovered parts of our society in this crisis. There's huge problems that need to be dissected and looked at in different ways, and I think that's our job as journalists, is to look at these stories on different levels.
And Georgea, your point about being in someone's soul, that's a really incredible way to think about it, because when you're interviewing someone and it's very sensitive and it's very personal, they don't have to tell us anything. And on top of that, we're going to be writing about it and telling the whole world about it with their name and their image. The idea of holding that as a great weight and a responsibility is really powerful. And I think it's important for readers to know that journalists care that much about the stories that we tell. And there's a lot of intentionality behind it. Why should people subscribe to the Free Press and journalism like this? Why is it important?
We're an incredible resource to the community. We cover everything from A to Z, including sports, education, business, stories like Amanda, that we're so fortunate to have a great support system to produce. And the story didn't happen in a vacuum. We have amazing editors. We have people that we constantly got feedback from. There's encyclopedic knowledge in the field of journalism at the Detroit Free Press. And it's part of a bigger community. I always say it's like, it takes a village, which I know it sounds so campy, but it does take a village, and the public that subscribes to us is part of that village. We're all in this together. I just want to take the opportunity to thank our subscribers or readers who have actively written to us about this story and how it's affected them. It's a huge accomplishment to have this type of dialogue started in our community, and I just want to say thank you to people who do subscribe.
I would also say the Free Press is one of the few places left that does this kind of uber in-depth reporting. Everybody talks about storytelling. Oh, I'm a storyteller. Oh, he's a storyteller. But really, not a lot of papers do that. And you don't have to do it in a 9,000-word story. You can do it in a 900-word story too. But the Free Press still does that. And we do it because we think it's important. We do it because we think it resonates with readers. I think the relationship people have with the Free Press is kind of a personal relationship. I got an email from some guy who said, I was wondering where your byline had been lately. And he said, now I know where it's been. But I thought that was really neat that somebody was paying attention to what individual reporters were doing. And so I do think people have a personal relationship with the Free Press, and I'm very grateful for that.
That's incredible. There's nothing more special than that. There's something about that just feels so genuine, that connection that we have with our community of readers and that dialogue. That's incredible. So I guess the last thing is subscribe to the Detroit Free Press to support journalism like this.
Indeed.
Thank you so much, Georgea and Mandi, for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, Nushrat.
Thank you very much.
Again, that was reporter Georgea Kovanis and photographer Mandi Wright. You can find links to their full reporting on this story in the description of this episode and on Freep.com. Special thanks to Georgea, Mandi, editors Georgea Kovanis and Anjanette Delgado. Nicole Avery Nichols is the editor of the Detroit Free Press. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Nushrat Rahman. Thanks for listening, and you'll hear more from us soon.